just brazenly said the quiet part out loud. They want to sexualize children as young as possible by exposing them to perverse pornography. Let's lock in.
You mentioned the Paxton case. And the AGs in many states are very clear about that. They're almost jubilant about being able to use these laws to ban young people from accessing content that could be educational if they are queer. And you're a principal, you have LGBT students in your school, and we also know that they're not receiving sex education for queer kids. We know that prurient interest could be, for many people, the very existence of transgender kids. More and more people are saying there simply are no transgender kids.
This is as close as we've ever gotten to an outright confession that the goal of transgender activists is to groom young children into gender ideology. And I know that's an ugly word, but this transgender identifying male lawmaker in Minnesota named Leigh or Chris Finke is saying pretty explicitly that he wants kids to be allowed to access pornography because it may be educational. He's opposing the Republican proposed law that would require age verification for porn websites. Very common sense measure. And this is the individual, by the way, who USA Today named its Transgender Woman of the Year in 2023. He also published 2 guidebooks advising queer kids to limit contact with their parents as they're transitioning. And according to Redux magazine, Finke allegedly mourned the death of a man who believed that children could solicit sex from adults. He also wrote a book with the biblically blasphemous title, Queerfully and Wonderfully Made, a guide for LGBTQ+ Christian teens that advises children to go to sex shops and have adults help them try on gear such as binders. But let's unpack this. Finke started his testimony at the Minnesota legislature with the false premise that there is such a thing as a trans kid, a child that is not yet at the age of reason, with their frontal lobe and cognitive functions still forming, cannot consent to life-altering drugs and surgery to change their sex, period, point blank, especially because those interventions are permanent. Detransitioners have said that it is basically impossible to reverse them once you've had your breasts removed or your male genitalia inverted or hormones injected into your body.
I was fast-tracked onto puberty blockers and then testosterone. The resulting menopausal-like hot flashes made focusing on school impossible. I still get joint pains and weird pops in my back, but they were far worse when I was on the blockers. A month later, when I was 13, I had my first testosterone injection. It's caused permanent changes to my body. My voice will forever be deeper, my jawline sharper, my nose longer, my bone structure permanently masculinized, my Adam's apple more prominent, my fertility unknown. I look in the mirror sometimes and I feel like a monster. I had a double mastectomy at 15. They tested my amputated breast for cancer. And I was cancer-free, of course. I was perfectly healthy. There was nothing wrong with my still developing body or my breasts, other than that, as an insecure teenage girl, I felt awkward about it.
All the detransitioners I've interviewed told me that they had pre-existing conditions, whether it was a mental health issue like bipolar disorder or even being on the autism spectrum, all of which made them automatically uncomfortable with puberty as it was. And you add to that each of them was struggling with loneliness. And so they found community in really twisted corners of the internet, people that would give them a sense of solidarity about the confusion they were experiencing. But when they saw violent adult content like Finke is promoting, they got dragged further down the gender ideology rabbit hole. It was not clarifying because porn is very disorienting and disturbing for a child's brain, anyone's brain, but especially a child's. It creates gender confusion that they otherwise would not have had. Another underreported story is that there are some kids who want to escape their bodies by transitioning because they were physically sexually abused as kids or sexualized by adults, which is exactly what pornography does in the virtual realm. Showing children pornography is also abusive. No child should be watching pornography? What difference does it make if they identify as a different sex than the one they're born with? Queer children are not more sexual than non-queer children. They're children. Unless the people who are so adamant about rejecting age verification law have a different motivation. My question is to you, who has an incentive to sexualize children? Let's really think about that. Pedophiles. The lawmaker is also suggesting that being trans is a deviant sexual fetish that is developed artificially over a child's adolescence by repeatedly seeing explicit content. These comments from Finke should scare the Democratic Party right now, because as long as they still have these spokespeople, the gender insanity is going to be associated with the Democrats. And that, among other things, lost them the 2024 election. That Trump ad, Kamala Harris is for they, them, I'm for you, that was the zinger that might have single-handedly handed him victory. This episode is a reminder for common sense voters of why they didn't want progressives to win. And Minnesota right now is going to be the Democrats' Achilles heel heading into the midterms. Mark my words. This might be the most messed up state in the nation. It's ground zero for the worst state governance, between Democrats allowing the abuse of taxpayers with billions of fraud. That was a horrific scandal. Or the abuse of federal officers by aiding in the obstruction of immigration enforcement. And now advocating for the abusive sexualization of kids. Where does it end in Minnesota? We need a complete and total shutdown of Minnesota Democrats until we can figure out what the heck is going on. But what do you think about all of this? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss out on future content.